soracağız, olur mu? Bana hatırlatırsın canım.
Tamam,
Yani
kime
sen de bil de
soracağız?
Çiğdem'e her oturumdan bunun sonunda vereceğiz diye.
Tamam. Nasıl olacak? Bir kişi, iki kişi, üç kişi mi vereceksiniz yoksa üç kişiye de
Üç
aynı
kişiyi
anda mı?
aynı anda şimdi şey yapacağım. Hocam indirdim. Şurada Nesrin Hanım'ın da şeyi sunumu.
Tamam.
Başlayabiliriz.
Tamam mıyız?
Tamam, şimdi son bir kez şey koy.
Pardon. Tamam, şunu kapatalım.
Günaydın sevgili katılımcılar. İkinci Uluslararası Tıp Hukuku Kongresi
On the second day of the second International Medical Law Congress, I wish you a fruitful day. Of course, I would like to start by thanking Medeniyet University as well as other partners. The morning topic is extraordinarily important. It concerns ethics, the policies of WHO, UNESCO, also the main foundations of bioethics and Oviedo Convention will be addressed with distinguished speakers. I will invite them one by one, but just before that, it is an intensive program. We have over 80 papers, so that's why we will have to limit it to 15 minutes plus 5. We will listen to the presentations first, and then we will start the Q&A session. Now I would like to invite Professor Dr. Nükhet Örnek-Büken from Hacettepe University, Faculty of Medicine. Also another distinguished professor Professor Nesrin Çobanoğlu from Gazi University, and our guest from Tarhan University, Faculty of Medicine, Professor Dr. Ali Rıza Bagheri. Please proceed to the stage. You want to listen to the presentations first. Okay, if that's your decision, then as you wish. The floor is yours, Professor Büken.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Firstly, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. I am very pleased with this Congress held in Antalya under the main theme, Legal and Ethical Aspects of Organ Donation and Transplantation. Yes, this talk is about organ allocation policies on WHO and UNESCO perspectives. As a member of the UNESCO National Commission for Bioethics Committee and also on behalf of UNESCO, the outline of my speech is follows. I will give a brief introduction into the ethics of organ transplantation. This doesn't also cover all sorts of ethical problems related to organ transplantation, but will provide basic information to start with in this section discussion. The ethics of science and technology always has had an international dimension. Nowadays, many international organizations have programs and activities in this area, we know. The developments illustrates that ethics and bioethics in particular has evolved from an academic discipline into field of public debate and also global policymaking. Following the global dissemination of science and technology, bioethics has also become increasingly international. Also, healthcare practices are becoming increasingly global, but guidelines and legal contexts differ and are sometimes, absent. Rules for transplantation and procedures for organ donation, for example, vary among countries, and these different approaches have contributed to abuses such as organ trafficking and commodification of transplant practices. Furthermore, the burdens and benefits of scientific and technological advancement are not equally distributed. Many international organizations have activities and advisory bodies in the area of bioethics. UNESCO and World Health Organization are not an exception. UNESCO, and whose work is very important. As a UNESCO National Commission for Bioethics Committee, I will some information about this Universal Declaration. October 19, 2017 will mark the 12th anniversary of the adoption by the General Conference of UNESCO, Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, which was signed by representatives of the 191 member states of the conference. This declaration is of major importance because it was the first legally binding documents approved by a global organization to address the whole range of subjects covered by bioethics. The UNESCO Declaration and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are part of an integral whole, which grounds both rights and ethics in the inherent dignity and equality of human beings. Policies concerning the allocation of organs cannot, therefore, disregard the principles affirmed in the Declaration. On the other hand, other documentation about, this issue was from World Health Organization. This document provides an account of the points discussed and the conclusions reached at a consultation on the ethical, access, and safety issues in tissue and organ transplantation. Also, we know Istanbul Declaration builds on the principles of the UNESCO Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, but I will not mention Istanbul Declaration in my speech because I know other speakers will talk about it. Humankind has always been the focus of the studies that are based on different perspectives of different scientific disciplines. In this section, in this Medical Law Congress on organ and tissue transplantation, the ethical, juridical, religious, sociological, and economic problems that people as the subjects and sometimes objects have been discussed extensively from national and international points of view. Our aim is to draw attention to the problems encountered in organ transplantation, produce the ways to solve them, and provide information for the relatives and also the general public. It is clear that some member states of EU and UNESCO have not assumed or have been unable to assume an appropriate level of responsibility in each of the areas of transplantation. There are a number of roles for which the World Health Organization and UNESCO are best placed to ensure that minimum levels of human access, safety, and ethical practice are adopted universally. Without intending futurism, scientific evidences suggest that transplantation medicine might be considered a health guarantee for the 21st century. Nevertheless, organ shortage, a social, psychological, ethical, moral, and probably legal and political problem is overriding transplantation, making this foreknowledge uncertain. This unjustifiable and harmful reality must imperatively be solved to avoid that on the waiting lists. It is also true that thousands of people die every day because of inequal socioeconomic conditions. The difference concerning donation and transplantation is that the solution is in our hands. This negative behavior contrasts with the UNESCO Declaration about responsibility to present generations over future generations, states that, recognizing that the task of protecting the needs and interests for future generations, particularly through education, is fundamental to the ethical mission of UNESCO, whose constitution enshrines the ideals of justice and liberty and peace founded on the intellectual and moral solidarity of mankind. And also, Article 1 establishes needs and interests of future generations. Present generations have the responsibility to ensure that the needs and interests of present and future generations are fully safeguarded. Furthermore, UNESCO Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights stated, whereas it is desirable to develop new approaches to social responsibilities to ensure the progress of science and technology contribute to justice and fairness and serves the interest of humanity, and also remarked to promote equitable access to medical, scientific, and technological developments, as well as the greatest possible flow and the rapid sharing of knowledge concerning those developments, and the sharing of benefits with particular attention to the needs of developing countries. Almost every day, intensive care units are rendered powerless to act because a potential donor cannot be used because of their family's refusal. Several explanations for this denial have been suggested. People are not aware that organ transplantation is a common part of medical care. Individuals are not aware that during life there might be more potential organ recipients than organ donors. Society is not conscious that the use of body parts after death offers a unique source of health. Medical teams are untrained in the subject of organ donation, we know, because of insufficient education on this topic. It is necessary to educate people about the significance of brain death, including medical doctors, and to redefine that as a process in which brain death is synonym of current death. Myths, misinformation, and prejudices are strong barriers of greater solidarity and altruism, with increased selfishness and doubts. The ethical problems of organ transplantation result from the fact that it is a highly risky and at the same time highly beneficial procedure involving questions of personhood, bodily integrity, attitudes towards the dead, and the social and symbolic value of human body parts. Moreover, words in organ transplantation implicitly and often uncritically transport ethical meanings. The word donation, for example, implies that there is a person acting voluntarily to benefit someone else. Donors, however, can be dead and are no longer able to act. Organs, moreover, are sometimes harvested without the dead donor's former consent. In ethical debates, this problem of an adequate wording has to be kept in mind. However, for the sake of argument, here the donor's and the recipient's perspective will be separated. It will be asked, who could and should give an organ? Who could and should receive an organ? As we said, over the past few decades, transplantation has become a unique cure and successful treatment for patients suffering from end-stage organ failure. The shortage of organs for transplantation is a major global health problem. We know there are different kinds of systems that are adopted by many countries in order to increase the number of the organs donated after that. There are, you see and know, two main types of systems that are adopted by almost every country. One of them is opt-in system, which is adopted by many countries, such as USA, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Germany, Switzerland, and also Turkey. In this organ procurement system, the organs of the decedents can be donated only if they express their wish by a written consent, or by carrying a donor card, or by telling their relatives about it when they were alive. The other system is the opt-out system, in which all members of the society are accepted as donors unless they state specifically that they don't want to donate their organs. Opt-out is also known as, you know, presumed consent, and is adopted by some European countries such as Austria, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Belgium, Denmark, France, Italy, Spain, and as well as Singapore. To increase the number of organs donated, incentives are also used, such as tax reductions, payments made to the donor's family, or giving priority to patients on waiting lists who have signed a donor card, as is practiced in Israel. There are conflicting views on which system is best for avoiding unnecessary death and resulting in an increase in the number of organs donated, including mandated choice. In most Western countries, the major source for transplanted organs are dead or brain dead persons, while in countries like Japan or Iran, living organ donation prevails. A major ethical question is related to the role of personal autonomy. Is explicit or implicit informed consent required? Or does that annul a person's right to determine what will happen with her body? Objection to post-mortem donations can, for example, be based on cultural or religious assumptions on how to appropriately handle the human corpse. Some religious authorities of monotheistic religions like Islam and Christianity have accepted brain death as criterion for the death of a human being and have thus endorsed organ transplantation. Yet others deny the right to call a still breathing person dead. Cultural conceptions of death, like in Japan, can contravene scientific convictions. Therefore, every case needs an assessment of the donors and recipients' cultural and religious attitudes towards brain death and organ donation. Procurement of organ is not limited to post-mortem organ donation. Living donation is an alternative for patients who are waiting for an organ to be transplanted from a deceased donor. It can be done between family members, you know, relatives, or between people who know each other well. The practice of living donation doesn't solve the problem brought about the shortage of organs. The scarcity of organs might be caused by many factors, including the psychological, religious, or other cultural reasons, as well as a lack of awareness regarding the importance of donating organs. Due to the insufficient number of donated organs and the high demand for new organs to be translated, new solutions to get over this scarcity come to the fore. As a result of this shortage, patients suffering from end-stage organ failure have started to look for organs abroad, which led to an international trade in organs involving commercial transactions. The concern over the purchase of organs is expressed by World Health Assembly adopted in May 2010, the WHO's guiding principles on human cell, tissue, and organ transplantation that forbade organ selling and argued its member states to take measures to prevent commercial organ transactions. Maximization of postmortem organ donation is also promoted as an ethically acceptable alternative for compensating the organ shortage. The scarcity of organs and the growing ease of internet communication lead to organ trafficking and transplant tourism. Although there is no reliable data showing organ trafficking, the reported news and some related studies show that there is ongoing market in human organs. Due to these problems, we know in many countries donating living organs is seen as an important alternative to cadaveric donation. Depending on legal regulation and cultural attitudes, the frequency of living organ donation ranges from 20% to 90% of all organ donations. Close family members, spouses, friends, and sometimes even strangers are considered as possible living organ donors. While living organ donation largely benefits the recipients, the donor's risks include severe health problems or even death, we know. For the donor, organ removal is a non-therapeutic intervention, and the risks are usually not balanced by direct benefits. With regard to the donor, physicians have to infringe on the ethical rule, first do no harm. In Latin word, primum non nocere, passed on in the traditional medical ethics and expressed in the Hippocratic Oath. However, in modern bioethics, respect for individual autonomy is often given priority over other moral rules, including the principle of non-malefaction. We know there are four main principles in biomedical ethics. First is beneficence, the second one is non-maleficence, and then respect of autonomy, and the last one is justice. No. Yes, the transfer of organs, extremities, or a face also raises questions of personal identity. A widespread fear raised by the transplantation of organs is that the organ recipient might experience psychological change, or more precisely, that personal characteristics might be transferred from one to the other. The idea of the body as locus and medium of personal identity has cultural as well as medical historical reasons. Consequently, the transplantation of a body part will change a person's identity, not just in an objective, physiological way, but in the way the recipient perceives and experiences the world. Thus, religious and cultural meanings of particular body parts, such as heart, eyes, gonads, and face, have to be considered in the ethical debate, as the patient's beliefs have an impact on their conception of self and personhood. The problem of organ trafficking and illegal organ trade have raised increased awareness among ethicists as well as international organizations. Those who criticize a free market of organs fear that this will seriously increase social injustice. Moreover, based on the concept of human dignity, they challenge the right to sell one's body parts. Others, however, argue that a ban on organ trade only leads regulations of the organ market would lead to more transparency, help to stop price dumping, to secure the rights of the vendor. International authorities such as the WHO and UNESCO have expressed concerns about transnational organ trafficking and
has set the aim to combat illicit trafficking of organs and tissues. Organ trafficking rests upon complex social networks. Donors often come from poor, developing countries, while recipients usually live in rich and highly industrialized countries. Illegal organ trafficking involves so-called brokers dealing in organs, as well as surgeons sometimes willing to transplant them illegally. So, it is feared that the practice of paying money for organs will increase injustice because only the wealthy will then be able to afford an organ transplantation treatment. The autonomy of the poor will in fact be limited due to their lower social status and financial constraints. Commercial donation will discourage altruistic donors, and consequently the number of altruistic donations will seriously decrease. Anti-commodification of the human body ignore the existential meaning of the body for personal identity of self-understanding. Yes, healthcare practices are becoming increasingly global, I said, but guidelines and legal contexts differ and are sometimes absent. Rules for transplantation and procedures for organ donation, for example, vary among countries, and these different approaches have contributed to abuses such as organ trafficking and commodification of transplantation practices. Furthermore, the burdens and benefits of scientific and technological advancement are not equally distributed. Poorer countries risk exploitation in this area and also in biomedical research, and exclusion from the benefits of biomedical progress. There also is a risk that double or at least different moral standards are applied in different regions of the world. With this declaration, UNESCO strives to respond in particular to the needs of developing countries, indigenous communities, and also vulnerable groups such as women, children, geriatric population, and poorer people. The declaration reminds the international community of its duty of solidarity towards all countries. Among the principles,
Hocam son 5 dakika toparlayalım mı?
Among the principles laid down in this declaration, those most relevant for the allocation of organs are benefit and harm, Article 4, equality, justice and equity, Article 10, non-discrimination and non-stigmatization, Article 11, solidarity and cooperation, social responsibility and health, including access to quality health care, and sharing of benefits on Article 15. I want to remind the participants there are a number of roles for which World Health Organization it is best placed to ensure that minimum levels of human access, safety and ethical practice are adopted universally. And you see who roles could include so many things. I pass this quickly because I have no time. And the last slide, in conclusion, one thing should be beyond and debate, though the donor's long-term medical health and psychological well-being should be assured. Screening criteria should be strict, with the threshold for ruling out unrelated donation for medical or physico-social problems kept very low compared with the threshold used in the living-related donation setting. Protocols for long-term follow-up of donors should be put into place, and the donor's rights to medical and psychological assistance related to the donation should be addressed. Finally, in accordance with the declaration, of Istanbul, any kind of unrelated donor transplants done for residents of one country in another country should be prohibited. Each country should strive to solve its own organ shortage, with or without an unrelated donation program. As you see, UNESCO strives to create a better understanding of the major ethical issues raised by science and technology, and supports analysis and discussion of those issues internationally, regionally, and also nationally. An essential part of this work is raising public awareness and stimulating public debate. It is also very important for us, for our country. Thank you for your attention.
Biz de teşekkür ediyoruz Sayın Hocam. Hakikaten
Thank you, Professor. It has been a thought-provoking speech presentation regarding the new methods of finding organs. Now I would like to invite our other professor, Professor Dr. Nesin Çobanoğlu. She will be discussing organ transplantation from the perspective of bioethics principles. Ethics is very important indeed in terms of medical law. As we prepare our documents, we in fact ensure that ethic principles are reflected on the paper, and we have difficulty when it comes to questioning them. Good morning and hi. Organ transplantations are, in fact, one of the main international problems, global problems. It has a particular place in medicine. However, legal aspects, I think, shape it in an extensive manner. Here, we know that organ transplantation involves, in fact, dilemmas where you see both good and bad practices. It applies to, in fact, all daily matters, but it has a very special place in global agenda. Here, we come together as legal and medical figures, discussing the legal and medical aspects of organ transplantation. Generally speaking, law tells us what we can do and what we cannot do with strict lines. I mean, there are definitions of right and wrong. However, in fact, creating a rule for every case may not be possible in medicine. That's why we know that ethics assist us, and ethics helps us guide our way. I see medical experts and lawyers here, and we know that the most fundamental aspect of medicine is an applied branch of scientific activity. So here, the guiding aspects would be ethics or biomedical aspects of it. Ethics is a branch of philosophy. It's about right and wrong, and the reasons for making our actions. As we define ethics, I use this painting by Escher. As you see, it is only black and white. You can reckon them as right and wrong, maybe. Here, I would ask our participants to focus on the left side and move right. As you move rightwards, you see, in fact, white geese on a black background. As you move from right to left, on the other hand, you see the black geese on the white background. In fact, you can clearly see white and black on contrasting backgrounds. That's why I like using this as I define ethics. However, when you look in the middle part, you see some gray areas with different proportions. Here, again, there is only green, there is only black and white, but it's very difficult to separate them from each other. And it's not easy to act in the middle, and that is where you come across in medicine the intermediary solutions, which is not defined by any legal principles or others. So medical ethics include dilemmas that physicians had to make to selection. That is something to do with their expertise, knowledge. That's why medical ethics is the disciplined study of morality. The professional identity of a physician denotes those individuals with the knowledge, because it requires the longest education on the face of the earth, skills, especially manual skills when it comes to organ transplantation, as well as many other skills, and lastly, values required to heal humans. So, to define a physician, we expect them to have all these knowledge, skills, and values. If any one of them is missing, then you come across with undesired situations in the practice of medicine. For example, there is a strong rival, Professor Dr. Ömer Özkan, in the next room. That's a rival topic to our discussion, as it refers to face transplantation. It refers manual skills and also other skills, indications. Ethics is important, we said, and here you see an example on the projection screen. Positive examples and negative examples. Well, we like to use positive examples in medicine as part of ethics. However, this is a negative example that I have to share. This is Dr. Yest, one of the negative examples regarding organ transplantation. I will use only the capitals of his name. It says maybe associate professor in front of his name. He has an international reputation. He is called Magic Fingers. However, there is something missing, which led to the loss of his physician title, and he has been searched with a red bulletin. What is that missing thing? It is the value aspect. So the biomedical principles or the fundamental principles of bioethics were not seen in his case, and that was clearly reflected in the practice. That's why we say knowledge, skills are important together with values. All right. When we look at the principles of bioethics, we see that they establish the main framework, many laws, many international bodies, and public opinion, in fact, are shaped by these principles. And I'd like to emphasize them with respect to organ transplantation. Maybe the first one is also the most recent one. However, we know that It is a ramification of the development in the respect for human rights, which is called autonomy. How do we see it in clinics? We see it as informed consent, which means people are, in fact, given information regarding their health issues and also guide them regarding what might be the future ramifications, future results, and also ensuring that they understand what we have taught. If we cannot understand that, they grasp it, then that doesn't make any sense, or it doesn't mean informed consent. I remember this tissue transplantation case. There was this informed consent document signed by the patient. It appears to be in place. However, the patient is also there, and different moments are recorded by camera and watched by the public, which is not in fact appropriate. And the patient says, I will be a minibus driver after this transplantation is done. If there was a really well-informed consent, the patient should know that he cannot be a driver, because in the indication list tells that the patient will be able to move his hand slightly, not drive a minibus, which requires another movement. So, providing information is important, but understanding that is as much important. Understanding that that information is understood or grasped. Here, the indication is the main ground for us. We have to work based on indications. Every physician should work according to that, but most importantly, that is the case in organ transplantation and providing relevant information as necessary. Okay, after the importance of information, here we can also tell about the indications to the patient. This is in fact one of the most indispensable parts, and it is considered as a piece of document, a piece of information written on a document, but it is more than that. In fact, it tells us the core of technical procedures, and it should be given the deserved place in real life. When you look at declarations, you see that this principle is there most of the time. Okay, informed consent. Informed consent applies to both living donors and transplantation from the deceased.
Gelelim yararlılık ilkesine.
The second one involves beneficence. Beneficence is again one of the recent principles for autonomy. It is as old as the medicine itself, one of the medical principles. So, considering that a physician starts his or her duty to benefit humans, then beneficence is as important as the medical profession. Without a doubt, another point, one of the points here is beneficence, because if an organ lacks function and cause the death of another person, should not be chosen for organ transplantation, but rather an organ that functions, so that the person does not continue to live dependent on machines. That's why beneficence is mostly covered in organ transplantations. Here, beneficence in fact, does not mean absolute benefit. Unfortunately, certain actions have damages. That's why it should be considered together with non-maleficence, and that would be the best approach to use them together. One of the most important principles of medicine, therefore, includes non-maleficence and balance them quite efficiently. In organ transplantations, it applies to both living donors. I apologize for my voice. I have infection. I'm trying to get over my influenza, but I have to drink water every now and then. So non-maleficence is important in our practices, but when we talk about living donors, there seems to be an opposite situation here. Living donors are healthy individuals, but they have this altruistic approach for the health of other individuals. Here, when you look from the perspective of a physician, non-maleficence seems to be violated. However, when you consider beneficence and non-maleficence and have the point in view with a view to altruistic movements, then we need to have a balanced approach and be very careful regarding this dilemma. I will come to this point later on. However, as the principles of bioethics, we have justice too. Justice, in fact, cannot be considered independently from equality. And here maybe we should also have another term in mind, which is fairness, where you in fact where you act in an equal way as you provide people with necessary things. So in fact we encounter quite challenging ethical problems when we talk about organ transplantations from this perspective, because it is limited and we don't have the adequate number for all the people. That's why we see that justice and equality appear as the most important thing. And we know that organs are one of the most limited sources in the world. That's why we need to regulate how to distribute and in which methods we should distribute them to people. Here, physician practices are important, as well as international declarations, and we see that an individual responsibility of the physician, as well as the society structure, and the democratic structure is very important here. Social imbalances in the society would certainly have important ethical ramifications on medicine. The individuals that might be stigmatized due to their negative situations, negative states may be the case. That's why we have to ensure organ transplantation for them with a view to justice. There are different approaches in different countries for balanced distribution. And when you look at the program schedule, it's clear that everyone will address it. So the next speaker's presentation will be important here. We have a colleague from Iran, and there will be a presentation on Iran's case. There were different perspectives on the figures, and also Istanbul Declaration is important, which I will touch upon, and it will be addressed in a different room too, in a different hall too. These all make up the whole. These pieces make up the whole. But we see that organ transplantation involves justice and equality as the main principles. The people who encounter this border between death and life should know that justice is respected to ensure that organ transplantation takes place efficiently.
Burada doğru yolda.
Here, one of the values that shows that we are on the right path is altruism. Altruism is translated as özgecilik in Turkish, and it means to give up on or to take on certain damages to ensure that another person receives certain benefits. And since the organ transplantation involves human bodies, as we speak now, despite the possibility of having alternative sources within the next decade, speaking about stem cells being the source of organs for the next years, we know that there are quick advancements there. However, as we speak now, it is still the human organs that comprise the process. That's why we have to focus on altruism. Being, in fact, ready to see certain damages for the higher good of another individual. Here, I'd like to wrap up like this. I was invited to a symposium which was called Symposium for Goodness. I am both a medical physician as well as having a public administration education. I said maybe the last point in goodness, the very good, the very end of goodness would be organ donation, and altruism in that sense appears as the most important value in terms of organ donation. Here, ethical problems focus on the following issues most frequently.
First and foremost, decision related to brain death should be made as in a very timely manner. So in different congresses and symposiums, we have dwelt on this issue, and in some other parts of the Congress, there will be speeches related to that. Brain death is the most important decision in organ transplantation, and the physicians have to abide by professional rules in this regard. The decision related to brain death should be made in a very timely manner. This is what I focus on, and I go on. Organ donation is about the donation of the individuals in an altruistic manner, and it might prevent the ethical problems to a large extent. So the point which is widely discussed is to donate, is organ donation. Organ donation might motivate us and it might solve ethical problems. Moreover, in our country and globally speaking, post-operative health care of living donor is another issue. We have to follow up the living donors in the post-operative period. A global ethical problem arises if the follow-up of the living donor is not maintained. Last but not least, I will wrap it up, and then I'm going to conclude. One of the global ethical problems related to organ trade is as follows. There will be a session on this issue when we talk about the main principles of bioethics. Making use of science and technology is organ trafficking makes use of biotechnology, unfortunately, so the link between human trafficking and trafficking of human organs should be analyzed to a further extent, and the legal regulations have to be put in place. Moreover, the exploitation of vulnerable people has to be prevented. Global inequality gives rise to human trafficking. However, in order to stop this problem, we have to work with the best physicians, and the Istanbul Declaration of Istanbul, issued in 2008, is a guiding principle in this regard. I think organ trafficking is highly emphasized in this declaration. As for the solutions related to organ trafficking, the problem of organ shortage is an issue. And unfortunately, we cannot meet the required numbers of organ donations to be performed. That's why we need living and deceased donors. And the ethical problems further increase since we cannot solve out the problem of organ trafficking. You can see the number of the donors in various countries. We have to stop migration of donors, recipients, and human body parts. I am of the opinion that organ trafficking is related to human trafficking. That's why legal fight is of utmost importance, and this problem does not concern only one country. It is a global problem. That's why we need a global cooperation, and we have to come up with a global cooperation to solve out this problem. In the next session, in the following session, and the other sessions, Oviedo agreements will be tackled. Furthermore, professional responsibility should be the case. The physicians have to abide by medical rules, and they have to have the required know-how. And moreover, the declarations, Istanbul Declaration and the Declaration of Istanbul Custodian Group, should be taken into consideration, and we should have global cooperation. I tried to analyze this challenging issue from the perspective of medical law. Thank you. Thank you. Medical law is a multidisciplinary area. That's why all your suggestions are of utmost importance, and moreover, I think it is of utmost importance to have such a congress, such an international congress.
Değerli katkılarda bulunacak.
The following speaker will be contributing to us in an international sense. We are very much curious as to the Iranian case. Professor Dr. Ali Reza Bagheri, Tehran University's Ali Reza Bagheri, will be taking the floor. His speech is entitled Oviedo Agreements, Human Rights and Biomedicine. He will go into further details. The floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to talk in this conference, which I would like to thank Dr. Kahvechi and also my colleague and friend, Dr. Ihsan Karama, for their kind invitation. I have been asked to talk about the Oviedo human rights and biomedicine. As you know, there are several international documents addressing the mostly ethical concerns on medicine and organ transplantation. One of the early documents which was developed was this Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine. And if you look at the other international instruments, you will find that they have quoted some phrases and paragraphs from this convention, and that's why it is really important to look at this document to see how the issues such as organ transplantation have been addressed in this international document. The focus of my presentation is only this convention. I do know that there are several speakers. My colleagues will talk about the UNESCO Declaration as well as the Declaration of Istanbul, which have focused on the issue of organ trafficking and transplantation. And that's why my focus would be to elaborate on this convention and to see how it's still relevant to the issue of organ transplantation in the current context. As you know, the Council of Europe is an intergovernmental organization set up in 1949. There are 47 member states, and the objective is to protect the human rights, democratic stability, and rules of law, and to find common solution to the challenges facing European society. And the objective also is to protect human dignity and fundamental rights in the field of biomedicine. The convention, the whole title is Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Dignity of Human Beings with Regard to the Application of Biology and Medicine. The short title is Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine. If you look at the declaration, if you look at the UNESCO Declaration of Bioethics, which I was involved in the discussion, the first draft of the UNESCO Declaration, it didn't have the title as Human Rights. But later on, the member states commented, and one of the member states quoted this convention that it's better to link between human rights and biomedicine, and that's why, and also bioethics, and that's why the title of the UNESCO Declaration, the 2005 Declaration, has been changed to UNESCO Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. And this is how it works. And the international documents, if you look at those documents, you will find that all of those documents have quoted or referenced to the notion of human rights in their document. This convention draws on the principles established by the European Convention on Human Rights in the field of biology and medicine. The aim is to protect dignity and identity of all human beings with regard to the application of biology and medicine. It sets out fundamental principles applicable to daily medical practice. And the convention also deals specifically with biomedical research, genetics, and transplantation of organ and tissue. I think the next session we have a speaker talking about the additional protocol of this convention on organ transplantation, which you will hear about the additional protocol later. As you may know, in 2017, it marks the 20th anniversary of this convention. Next month in October, there will be a conference in Strasbourg talking about the achievement of this convention after 20 years. There are 4 additional protocols to this convention. The first one in 2002 is additional protocol to the Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine concerning transplantation of organs and tissue of human origins, which my colleague will talk about this in the next session. The second one is the additional protocol to prohibit the cloning of human beings. The third one in 2005 is the additional protocol which has focused on biomedical research. And the fourth one is the additional protocol on genetic testing. So far, there are 6 countries which they have signed the protocol, but for those 6 countries, it hasn't been followed by ratification. However, 29 countries have signed and ratified the convention in their own country. And if you look at the numbers, that it shows that not all member states of the Council of Europe have signed this document. The convention, which was developed in 1997, it consists of preamble as well as 14 chapters with 38 articles. The chapter 6 and chapter 7, which is the focus of my presentation, it talks about organ and tissue removal from living donors for transplantation, and chapter 7, prohibition of financial gain and disposal of part of the human body. The convention doesn't talk about organ trafficking, and if you look at the time which the document was developed in 1997, at that time the issue of organ trafficking and transplant tourism was not really a global issue, and that's why it's not addressed in this document. And maybe that was the reason that people, 155 colleagues, they gathered in Istanbul in 2008, and they have developed the Declaration of Istanbul on Organ Trafficking and Transplant Tourism, which now still it's quite relevant to work on this issue. It became a really global issue. Last week I was in UNESCO Paris working on a document for the health of refugees. It's a bioethical response to the situation of refugees, and we have added a paragraph that refugees have to be protected because they are targeted as brokers for organ trafficking and transplant tourism, and it is important for the health authorities in countries, especially in transit countries, because a refugee, the new phenomenon is that a refugee who leaves his country have to pass several countries to get to the destination countries, and this is really important to get the responsibility to the transit countries to protect refugees in terms of organ trafficking and transplant tourism. These are the other chapters of the convention. The convention, in the preamble, it says it's a signatory convention which refers to Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, Conventions for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedom of 1950. It respects for human being and recognizing the importance of ensuring the dignity of human being. The convention concerns the misuse of biology and medicine that may lead to acts endangering human dignity. I think this was one of the most concerns that the Council has developed this document. The Convention affirms that the progress in biology and medicine should be used for the benefit of present and future generations. If you look at this document, it's one of the earliest documents which has addressed the concern about the future generation. And now in UNESCO, last week the discussion was whether the UNESCO International Bioethics Committee should develop a new international instruments to protect the future generation in terms of the allocating health resources, for example. In the Chapter 1, Article 1, the protection of the dignity and identity of all human beings has been quoted. The interest and welfare of the human being shall prevail over the sole interest of society or science. I think this is one of the most important messages of this convention, and for any international organizations working on science and technology, I think this has to be referenced to this convention, because it's really important that every achievement in terms of science and technology should be at the service of human being, not damaging the notion of human dignity. Equitable access to healthcare has been mentioned in this document. Any intervention in the health field, including research, must be carried out in accordance with the relevant professional obligations and standards. And if we look at how organ trafficking is going on as a global phenomenon, we will see if there is any case in terms of organ trafficking or transplant tourism, medical professionals are involved. It is not possible to remove a kidney or part of liver if no medical professions are involved. That's why it's important to educate healthcare professionals, to remind them about their responsibility and their duties in terms of taking care of all human beings, their patients, and to avoid any activity in terms of organ trafficking or transplant tourism, because they are the one who can prevent it. In the Chapter 2 addresses the very important issue of consent. Free and informed consent has been stressed in this document. Protection of persons not able to consent. In case of minor adults with mental disability, consent should be provided by representative or an authority provided for by law. When I elaborate Chapter 5, 6, and 7, I will get back to this one, and I think this is one of the points which the convention has to be revised, and I will say how and why it's really needed. Article 7, protection of persons who have a mental disorder, and also the document talks about the emergency situations. Everyone has the right to respect for private life, but at the same time, it says that there is a limitation for that, and that limitation has to be set by the law, if there is going to be any limitation on individuals' private life. Chapter 4, it talks about human genome. It calls to avoid any discrimination against a person on the grounds of his or her genetic heritage. Predictive genetic tests may be performed only for health purpose or for scientific research linked to health purpose and subject to appropriate genetic counseling. Intervention to modify the human genome is prohibited unless it's for preventive or diagnostic or therapeutic purposes. Non-selection of sex, there is exception on this, which where serious hereditary sex-related disease is to be avoided. Chapter 5, it talks about scientific research, and again, in the field of biology and medicine, it has to be carried out freely. and is subject to protection of human being. And that's why in terms of biomedical research, we have an institution, IRBs or ethics committee, who are in charge of protecting human subjects in biomedical research. There are several international and professional documents on biomedical research and how to protect individuals who take part in this kind of biomedical researches. Protection of persons undergoing research and research on a person may only be undertaken in 5 conditions. It sets 5 conditions if an individual is going to take part in biomedical research. Protection of persons not able to consent to research also has been addressed in this document. There are some suggestions. The Article 17, protection of persons not able to consent to research. I will get back to this again. Research on embryos in vitro also has been addressed in this document. It calls for more protection for human embryos when they have been used for biomedical research. Chapter 6 talks about organ and tissue removal from living donors for transplantation. The general rule is removal of organs or tissue from a living person for transplantation may be carried out only for the therapeutic benefit of the recipient and where there is no suitable organ or tissue available from a deceased person. Therefore, the convention gives priority to organ donation from deceased persons, not living persons. If there is no suitable organs from a deceased donors, then in that case, removal an organ from a living donor is permissible. And there shouldn't be any other alternative therapeutic method of comparable effectiveness. I wonder if a kidney transplant surgeon can quote the last part of this article by saying that there is no comparable effectiveness in terms of kidney transplantation from a living donor compared to the deceased donors. Because if you compare these two, still they are not matched. Still the viability of a kidney from a living donor is in terms of effectiveness, still is better than an organ from a deceased donor. And that's why they may challenge the last part of this convention by saying that if we quote this convention, still living donors should be given more priority compared to the deceased donor. But the convention's intention is to give priority to organs coming from deceased donors, not living donors, and that would be a challenge for the convention. The necessary consent as provided for under Article 5 must have been given expressly and specifically either in written form or before an official body. That means a written consent or oral consent, both have been accepted in this document. The Article 20, protection of persons not able to consent to organ removal, it goes on by saying no organ or tissue removal may be carried out on a person who does not have the capacity to consent under Article 5. This is the general rule. And then the convention just mentions several exceptions to this general rule. It says that removal of organs from a person who does not have the capacity to consent may be authorized if, first, there is no compatible donor available, second, the recipient is a brother or sister of the donor, and third, the donation must be life-saving for recipient, and the fourth one, the potential donor concerned does not object. Okay. Now imagine there is a mentally disabled child or young adult in the family. That means that person can be a donor for his brother or his sister, even if he cannot give his consent as set up in the document, expressly informative consent to donate his kidney to his brother or sister. That means in some jurisdictions, the father of that disabled child can authorize kidney removal from that mentally disabled child or young adult to his sister or his brother. And if you go back to the Article 5 and 6, which talks about informed consent by persons who does not have the capacity to consent, we are talking about living organ donors. And then you will see, oh, okay, there would be a challenge or a problem with this document if you want to apply to a person as a kidney donor, a person who is a mentally challenged or mentally disabled young adult. That means even he cannot give his informed consent or to donate his kidney, still he can be an organ provider for his brother or his sister. The second challenge would be, it says if there is no it says that the third condition says the donation must be life-saving for the recipient. That would be a challenge also. For 1999 in Manchester, I was talking why in Islamic culture we agree for organ donations. You are not, in base of Islamic Sharia, you are not allowed to hurt yourself, but you can give consent to someone to cut your body, to remove your kidney for donation. And in Islamic Sharia, it's been accepted based on saving another patient's life with organ donation. You can hurt yourself by authorizing a physician for kidney removal only based on saving another patient's life. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Radcliffe, she asked me a very smart question. She said, in this case, how you authorize kidney removal, because it's not life-saving procedure. There is an alternative to that, which is dialysis. When you have dialysis, a patient who needs kidney transplantation, there is an alternative method of treatment, which is dialysis. In this case, the question was referring to brain death cases in Islamic context. But in this case, the question is when a procedure is not really a life-saving procedure, like kidney transplantation because of an alternative of dialysis, how you can sanction this. Chapter 7, prohibition of financial gain and disposal of part of the human body. It prohibits any financial gain. The human body and its parts shall not, as such, give rise to financial gain. Because people who developed this document, they were concerned about organ markets, which if you go back to 1997, there was a discussion in some countries that you can permit people to sell their body parts. And that's why it's been prohibited in this European document that it shall not give rise to the financial gain. If someone wants to donate his kidney, it has to be altruistic donation, but not selling body parts. Article 22, disposal of a removal part of the human body, which it says when any part of a human body is removed, it may be stored and used for a purpose only based on appropriate informed consent. But what is appropriate informed consent? If you look at the additional protocol, it also elaborates on that in 2002 when they realized that the Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine cannot cover all challenges which we were facing in the new millennium in 2000, and that's why they have added additional protocol in 2002 to address and to focus only the issue of organ transplantation. Chapter 8, it talks about infringements of the provision of the convention. Chapter 9, a relation between this convention and other provisions, which it says in Article 26 that restrictions on the exercise of the rights, and Article 20, it talks about the wider protection for human beings. Chapter 10 talks about public debate. Yesterday there was a discussion here about whether presumed consent policy would help, or whether family should be even asked for consent if their loved one is a brain dead case for organ donation. The fact is, in bioethics, we are concerned about these issues because of the public trust. We are concerned that if in any organ procurement system the family are not consulted, the society is not consulted. In this case, if any activities in organ transplantation and organ procurement system, if any activity causes distrust of the public, it will damage the whole institution of organ transplantation. That's why we should be very careful about public trust, not to do anything which may damage public trust. I think that would be a priority for any organizations, NGOs, health authorities who are working on organ transplantation.
Sayın Bageri, süremiz tamamlandı. Misafir ek süresi.
Would you be so kind to wrap up your speech, because we have time limit? You know, there are many documents which are subject to interpretation, but the reference goes to the European Court of Human Rights. If there is any question or any kind of interpretation which there is no consensus on that, then it has to be referred to the Court of Human Rights. It also, in chapter 12, it talks about the protocols. Later on, we saw how 4 other additional protocols have been added, referenced to the Convention of Human Rights and Biomedicine, which one of those protocols in 2002 addressed the issue of organ transplantation. It also, the amendment, the chapter 14 talks about final clauses, for example, how to be signed by the countries, ratification, entry into the force, and also non-member state if they can join the convention or not. This book has been published last week. One of the chapters which we have in this book is about organ transplantation and also brain death. It was published by the Imperial College Press last week. I don't have a copy here actually to present even to my colleague. But you can see how in Islamic context we deal with the issue of brain death and organ transplantation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Teşekkür ediyoruz. İsterseniz.
Thank you. Please be seated. Please be seated, and I will ask other participants to proceed to the floor. Professor Nükhet and Professor Nesrin. We had a 15-minute delay, and our speakers used their plus 5 minutes. Not to hinder the next sessions, we will have a 15-minute Q&A session, a short Q&A session. I'll have to limit it to a couple of questions or 3 questions maximum. Please introduce yourself shortly and refer to the relevant speaker. 2 questions, 3 questions, I guess. Okay, let's get them one by one.
My name is Abdel Hadi Brezat from Jordan. I am a director of Organ Transplantation Center. one question to Professor Alireza. Really, it is a confusing and very annoying subject, the word comparable. So would you advise to some change in these words, in these conventions, but because not only between the professionals the problem, it's in the court there is a problem. When you go to the court, there is a case, the lawyers are stuck to this word because they want to take this kidney from this person and we don't know why. Dialysis for the kidneys, also it is an alternative treatment. Disease donation alternative. So would you like to suggest for any amendments in this convention or other convention to avoid this annoying problem? Thank you.
Should I answer now? Should I answer now?
Yes.
Thank you for the question. My colleagues who were involved in the discussion for the Istanbul Declaration would remember how much time we spent on how to prioritize deceased donors compared to living organ donors. I think what we did was more diplomatic in terms of putting in the words. We have in that document, the Istanbul Declaration, based on ethics, we said there are less ethical concerns in removing an organ from a deceased donor compared to removing an organ from a living donor. And that's why the emphasis in that document is to prioritize for each country to adopt a policy to give more priority to removing an organ from deceased donors like brain death donors. For example, in my country, Iran, which Dr. Najafizadeh will talk about this, we gave more priority to build our infrastructures for organ transplantation based on removing organs from deceased donors rather than living donors. Because in terms of ethics, it's more problematic. But in this document, it talks about comparable effectiveness, which itself, this terminology would challenge in some countries, as our colleague from Egypt just mentioned. If you say comparable effectiveness, then a transplant surgeon would challenge you that if you talk about comparable effectiveness, give me a kidney from a living donor, it's more viable. The survival rate of the recipient would be more compared to the deceased donors. I think being more diplomatic, which we tried to be in the Istanbul Declaration, is to give priority based on ethics to deceased donors rather than living donors. And also we talked about self-sufficiency in each country in the Istanbul Declaration. It was also because based on self-sufficiency, we are encouraging countries to expand their deceased donor pools rather than getting organs from living donors. Thank you.
Teşekkür ediyoruz. İkinci sorumuzu alalım.
The second question.
Okay, hello, I'm Professor Titi. I'm a professor of nephrology and kidney transplantation. I just need to make a small comment or actually share my opinion with you on that discussion you had with Professor Radcliffe on kidney transplantation not being life-saving. And I beg to differ, because it is life-saving, because we know that the patient survival rate if you receive a living kidney, if we're talking about living kidney recipients, the patient survival rate after 10 years is about 80 to 90%, and the 25-year survival rate is about 60%, whereas on dialysis, the figures, 10-year survival rate may be only 10 or 20%. So I know we should have some lawyers and lawmakers in this room, and my point of view would be, if I pick a gun and shoot someone, he's going to die immediately, and I will be a murderer. But based on Radcliffe's discussion, if I try to kill someone by giving him a small dose of poison every day and he dies after 10 days, I will not be a murderer. So no, dialysis, transplantation is life-saving because dialysis patients die. They don't have to die immediately, but they do die after some time. So yes, it is life-saving, I guess.
Thank you. I think my discussion with Janet Radcliffe was, the focus was more on the time. If you have a patient who wants to get a kidney from a living donor, while dialysis is an alternative treatment for a short period of time with no change in his medical conditions as a kidney recipient, then you can tell the patient, okay, you have your donor, a living donor, but now we can put you under dialysis until we can find a donor which is a deceased donor. And then again, based on what I have referred in this convention, you can challenge me that comparable effectiveness which you put in this document, not me, but the one who developed this document, then based on this you can challenge me, I understand, that even reference to this document, still a living donor would be better than a deceased donor.
No, actually staying on the waiting list is safer. Even if you're waiting for, even if you're going to get a very good deceased kidney, actually if you're going to get a living kidney, even if you're going to get a living donor kidney 2 months from now, if we take a big group of patients and transplant some of them now with a living kidney and transplant the other group just 2 months from now, you'll see a mortality difference. I mean, not 2 months, but within a year, you will see a very significant difference in the mortality rates. So I think, no, staying on dialysis is a very bad procedure that nobody really wants to go through. It's not a treatment. It's just keeping patients neither alive nor dead. It's not life. But it's not a medication.
Part of my response to Radcliffe was based on the quality of life of the patient, not just life-saving, but the quality. I'm sure my colleagues here, Dr. Nasreen and Dr. Nuket, can comment on that better than me.
Evet. Şimdi Sayın Musallah ve Sayın Bagheri arasındaki tartışma.
The discussion between Mr. Musallah and Mr. Kadiri, in fact, enriches our debate. So what the medicine says is that we want to get this transplantation from the deceased rather than the living. There were discussions yesterday. There were, of course, ethical discussions. There were ethical answers. Professor Nelson referred to altruism. Professor Nuket referred to other things. However, there is not one single answer here, I guess. We cannot reach one single answer. Would you like to make a few remarks to professors? Yes. In ethics, there is no single right or wrong. If there was, we wouldn't have an ethical discussion. We would only create a legal rule, and that would be all. We are human beings dealing with human beings, but we do it in a scientific manner. And yes, we intervene in the lives of people, but we make decisions by respecting their lives. In fact, this is a ramification of all these different perspectives. Here, what we agree on is increasing the number of organ donations and increasing the transplantation from the deceased. Here, altruistic values and other values guide us, and in fact, we try to ensure that this is done in an efficient way without resorting to financial means. And here I refer to fairness, as you remember, as the main principle of bioethics. But if you damage fairness, then together with justice and equality, then you're going to see ethical problems all around the organ donation issues. It is quite natural that we have different approaches. We are trying to find the right approach as in many clinical issues. Thank you.
There are two determinants is very important. One is medical indications. The other is patient's preferences. And the most important thing, so you said that quality of life, and then socioeconomic conditions, and then the other conditions. So when we make clinical ethical decision making, we look all of them, and then in unit cases we make decision. It's important. Thank you.
Tabii konunun konuşmacılarımızın
Of course, as our speakers emphasized, the legal perspective is very important. Our legislation, for example, refers to the age of 18, and there are many other details which attach significance to organ transplantation. It is, in fact, an exemplary legislation in our case. Secondly, we refer to ethics as covered by Oviedo Convention, and it is a convention that refers to human dignity all around the world, but there is inequality between humans too. We refer to organ transplantation with respect to living donors and deceased donors so that we can extend human lives. However, there are countries lacking organ transplantation altogether. Okay, there are efforts in that direction, but they are insufficient. One of the most relevant institutions is the Turkish Organ Transplantation Foundation. I don't know whether Mr. Eyüp, Professor Eyüp would like to add anything, but it's a global challenge, and we all have big responsibilities, and that's why we're here. Anything you'd like to add, Professor Eyüp? No? If there is no other question or contribution, I saw a hand there. Hi, Istanbul Başkent University Organ Transplantation Coordinator, Fadime. The first question was, in fact, Professor Musallah's question. Thank you for asking it in advance. My second question will be about the procedures, about how the things work. We do not get organs from a mentally challenged child. In the presentation, the presentation said the sisters or brothers can be the donor. What about the parents? Can this child give donors to parents? If no, is that because the kid requires care, or is there any reason preventing that from happening for parents?
What I have mentioned was quoted. What I have mentioned was a direct quote from the convention, and I mentioned that to me it's quite challengeable. You can challenge the document even because you may think of conflict of interest for the family members themselves to get a kidney from let's say young adult mentally disabled person in the family, either for the brother or sister or even the parents. The document doesn't say that or doesn't sanction to give the kidney to the parents. It just says to brother or sister, but still to me it's a challenge to permit organ removal from that person. If you look at the family dynamics, you will realize how it's, in terms of conflict of interest, there is a question mark, a big question mark, to permit organ removal from that person's, from the family member. if you look at the situation in the family, when a doctor says to someone that your brother and sister can be an organ donor or kidney donor for you, and then the data which in a paper they mentioned, when within the family there is a need for kidney donation, the one who finally donate her kidney is the youngest single female of the family. This is how it works. That means it's a kind of if she does not donate her kidney, she will be subject to stigmatization within the family that her brother wants a kidney but she didn't donate her kidney to her brother. That means discrimination. That means a lot of psychological pressure for the youngest female member of the family if she does not comply with what the family wants. And just imagine about a disabled child or young adult, mentally disabled young adult in the family. He is in the hands of the family members, and now you permit the family member to get his kidney if he wants or if he needs a kidney for transplantation. That's why I mentioned this is a challenge for the document.
Şimdi bizim ülkemizde tabii yasa olarak bunun sınırları çizilmiş. 18 yaş ve
In our country, we say 18 years old, but there was a similar example yesterday, like yours. Professor Levent mentioned about practices and the psychological processes of a donor after entering the center, and he said, Dr. Levent, sometimes due to family pressure, the person goes to the physician at the last moment to the physician and says, in fact, I do not want to give it, but there is this serious pressure on me. And in that case, here we mean to protect the healthy donor, and we say, no, this donor is not appropriate for the process. What do you say as legal persons? Professor Levent asked. In fact, this is a last-minute give up, last-minute change of mind. And here, of course, we look for free will, and the physician is under challenge. But here, ethics and, of course, legal practices will show us in a different way. But Professor Bagheri's remarks are important as we tend to think differently. We have to thank you all because of the time limit. In fact, we need the microphone.
Diyorum ki aynı
Well, if you talk about this mentally challenged person, can they give it to their parents? Why do we say sisters and brothers? Can they give it, yes or no? My question is as such. There is this ambiguity, there is this question mark. Can they give it to their parents?
Your question is quite relevant. Your question is quite relevant, but the document does say explicitly, unless his kidney goes to his brother or sister. But it doesn't talk about parents. But your question is quite relevant. What was the rationale for saying yes to brothers and sisters but not the parents? I don't know what was in the mind of colleagues who developed this document, but your question is quite relevant.
Teşekkür ediyoruz. Çok açtık, onun için bitirmek.
Thank you very much. We have to cover up this part, complete this part. Now I would like to invite Professor İhsan Karaman to give the thank you plaque certificates to these speakers.
Keyif nasıl? Gerek yok ya.
Sayın katılımcılar, bir sonraki toplantı 11.30'daymış.
Dear participants, the next meeting will take place at 11:30 for your information.
Değerli katılımcılar, saat 11.30'da öteki oturum başlıyor.
The next session will start at 11:30, distinguished participants.